Reading The Shadow of the Torturer by Gene Wolfe is like you're living in a fever dream. Let's jump into it. So to start out, if you end up enjoying this video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe because that would be greatly appreciated. But we're going to go ahead and talk about The Shadow of Torturer today by Gene Wolfe. This is going to be spoiler free. Not that you can really spoil this book anyways, because like I said, it is like a fever dream. You don't really know what's happening. But either way, we'll jump into it and I'll give you some pros, some cons, what I thought about it, and what just the experience as a whole was with reading this. So to explain like a brief summary of what this book is about, it's kind of hard to do because it's a concept of how deep do you want to go with explaining this to a person, because I believe you could explain the whole premise of this whole series to someone and you still probably wouldn't be giving a spoiler to anyone at all. That's how complex this book is. At the base of it though, this is a story about a man named Severian. He is a person that was raised in a torturer's guild, and you're following his journey through being this apprentice torturer, as well as his coming of age tale in a way. And the more complex thing about it is this isn't a first person perspective from Severian in that moment. This is actually him at a later point in like an autobiography, sort of telling his story of how he became who he was. And so the narrator himself is Severian, not some random third person other entity narrator describing things happening like normal books, but it's Severian himself. And so the whole premise and the idea around this is that, can you trust Severian's narration, and is he reliable, or is he biased and telling you what he wants to tell you to make himself look better per se? That's sort of the premise around the book. The even more complex version is that this retelling from Severian is actually Gene Wolfe translating what Severian wrote in his original autobiography in modern day English to us, but the original biography was in an ancient language that none of us knew, so some of the words are mixed up and used for different things. Like I said, not really a spoiler, but the book itself is so in depth that it just automatically has so much to talk about without even going into detail. Throughout this journey though, you follow Severian and you see what his story is and the things that he does. And it gives me honestly a lot of Alice in Wonderland or Homer's The Odyssey type vibes. It's these crazy tales and events that are happening to our characters that are very mythical in a way, is the way I see it. And the whole experience of reading this is just so strange. To start out, it just punches you immediately in the face. You have no clue what's going on. You don't know what's happening. You don't understand any of the words. Gene Wolfe does not baby feed you at all. And he just throws you into this world where everything is just such a mystery. And you're just trying to get some type of grasp. It took me probably 3 or 4 chapters before it kind of like clicked for me. And not clicked in the point where I'm saying I 100% understood the story, but to the point where I was understanding enough to where I could follow the story. And so I can see why this book has gained so much praise, because honestly, the language, the lexicon of words, the writing, everything that Gene Wolfe did in this is just masterful. Each sentence is so perfectly crafted, and you could tell there's so much time devoted to every single word that's placed in this book that it's honestly like mind-blowing in a way. And it kind of makes you feel incompetent if you're someone who likes writing, because you're like, well, crap, I'll never do what Gene Wolfe did with this. And so it's kind of humbling to read something like this. And honestly, it's just such a unique experience. And the way that things are just described in general too, the reason why I say it's like a fever dream is because the way he explains things, he like gives you a picture of something, describes it in a very unique, peculiar way that only you can imagine it, but it almost feels like I'm sort of like, for me at least, the way I interpreted it and was viewing it in my head, because I'm a visual reader, it was like a sort of like a watercolor painting. So like the background image I have here, and there's like some others, I was just like, it was like an ever-changing watercolor painting to me when he was describing scenery and things happening and going from place to place, and how like vibrant and unique the experience in the world was. Because this isn't your typical fantasy world. It's actually a sci-fi world. It's placed to you in a fantasy element. So if you aren't looking deep into it, you may think it's pure fantasy, but there's a lot of actual elements in it that are sci-fi, and they're just described in such different ways that you don't really pick up on it unless you really dive into the language and what he's trying to describe. There's a few things like that I would recommend that you pay attention to, because I would say just know everything's not as it seems on the surface. If he describes something to you, it might mean something totally different if you actually dive into what it is, and if you think out of the aspect of a fantasy world. So even though it's a fantasy setting, I want you to imagine that it's not, and that it's actually so far in the future that everything seems fantastical, if that makes sense. So try to imagine it as a sci-fi while you're reading it with a fantasy aesthetic is what I do. And you can do it however you want. And I think it will give you more perspective when he's describing certain words and themes. And I don't think that's really a spoiler. It's just me pointing out how in-depth the writing is that Gene Wolfe did. This is truly a masterpiece and nothing like I've ever read before. Now, with all that being said, is it my favorite book of all time? No, it's definitely a masterpiece. And honestly though, even though it's not my favorite of all time, it is up there in terms of what it's bringing creatively to the table. This is one book I've read where it actually makes me want to reread the book immediately to see what I missed, what I want to go back on, what I see. There's other books as well, like Wheel of Time, which you want to go back because you want to see like, oh, this was foreshadowed. But this isn't even about foreshadowing. This is just about diving into what he's talking about now that I have more context into the words and the world he's giving us, and just seeing what it is supposed to be that's being shown to you, not, oh, what's the foreshadowing? It's not even about foreshadowing with rereading these. It's actually about diving in and just learning more, which I find is an interesting experience that I've never had before with a book. Because a lot of times with books, I just reread them for more context and things of that sort. But this is like, I could see me rereading this book every year and coming back with a new perspective on a different chapter, a different character, different things, and what I missed before. There's just so much to go in depth with that. There's even full-on books that are published to explain chapter by chapter what is happening in this series. And Gene Wolfe even has a whole lexicon for the language he created and made in this. It's just honestly insane when you think about it. I would have never expected like a fantasy sci-fi series to do this. And it's kind of funny when you see like someone always talking about literary fiction and they say, oh, fantasy sci-fi, that's not real literature, blah, blah, blah. And they're always uppity. Well, they obviously haven't read Book of the New Sun, because this is more complex than a lot of the classic literature that you may run into. A lot of people compare it to Ulysses by James Joyce. I've never read Ulysses, so I don't know that. But from what I understand, that's a book that tries to make its readers feel stupid or dumb because of how smart James Joyce is. This one, though, Gene Wolfe doesn't try to make you feel dumb. He just gives you revelation after revelation and opens up your mind to what you can do with words. And it's just so fascinating. I know I've been rambling for a while on this, but it's just so mind-blowing of an experience that I just have to talk about it. And this is just the first book. I haven't even read the next three. I think it's like set up in two duologies. This book here is Shadow of the Torturer and Claw of the Conciliator. And so I'm going to read that next. When, I don't know, but I definitely want to get to it. It's just such a fascinating premise. And I'm sorry if I'm not explaining it very well. There's not really much you can spoil outside of like what's happening, because it's just so hard to understand. You'll only get like 50% of this book when you read it for the first time. And I'm like, oh yeah, I understand this. And then I looked up some podcasts talking about it, and I'm like, I did not pick that up. Oh my God, how did I miss that? Whoa. And there's so much to talk about with this that it's just such an interesting topic. I'm surprised it's not discussed more as it is. In terms of cons though for this book, to be honest with you, I feel like for some people, the whole nature of not knowing what's going on and not having everything fed to you can be considered a con, but I don't personally consider a con. Like, I would say I don't really have any cons for this book. Maybe my only con is that the plot just kind of happens, or that there's not much of an ending. It just kind of like cuts off, and then he's like, we'll get to it next time, or to be continued. I guess that's the biggest con, is just the ending being so abrupt. But honestly, when I'm looking at this personally for my own enjoyment, I don't really have any major cons with it, because this is the type of book I love. In TV, anime, books, whatever I'm consuming media-wise, I always love series that make me think more and want to dive in further, and don't give me the answers and want me to form it myself. This is like, I feel like it was a tailor-made book for myself, and it's just such a unique experience. I enjoyed it so much, and I loved it so much. I really hope you guys consider reading this, because it's just such a unique experience, and I don't think it's for everyone. I'm not saying it's the best thing ever, but I feel like it was just tailor-made for myself and my personal love of books. Now, one less possible con I wanted to mention for those that could be a trigger is the relationships that Severian has. Some viewpoints could be considered misogynistic with this. Now, due to the setting and era that this book is in, we don't know the context of that time if that's something that is considered misogynistic. And I think part of it is the lens that we're given through the point of view of Severian and his lack of experience in the world that causes him to treat women in specific ways. And so I don't think it's a con on the book as itself. It is in there, but I don't think it's the author trying to put his misogynistic views on us. I think it's just a character that may have misogyny by default as himself as a character, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to mention that there, just in case if anyone is worried about that type of thing, then that is something that could deter you from the book, but it's not a big deal, I don't think, and I still think you should give the book a shot. Well, that's me rambling and raving about The Shadow of the Torturer. I can't wait to read the next ones and tell you guys how I feel. And I kind of wanted to do a spoiler video of it, but honestly, I don't feel like I'm educated enough to do a spoiler video on this series, because I feel like you would need like an hour-long documentary to talk about each book and what is in there, or like podcasts, and I don't feel like doing that. And so it just wouldn't give it justice, and it would take a lot of manpower and time to do it. So I'll just enjoy watching podcasts in regards to that. But if you've read this book, tell me what you think about it. No spoilers for the future book, since I'm still reading it. And if you are interested in reading it, tell me if I convince you to pick it up. Other than that though, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you could leave a like and subscribe, that'd be greatly appreciated. And I hope to see you guys next time. Bye-bye.